What's going on, guys? Alex here, Select MX again. Today is a pretty exciting day. I'm super stoked to tear into this YZ125 engine. When I bought it, it had the top end off, so I did get a little bit of a sneak peek inside, but I put it back together just to keep everything in one place while I was just had to decide, I guess, and test fitting some of the other parts. But now is the time where we're going to tear into it and see exactly what we're dealing with and what's going to come up. So let's get right to it and start tearing into this thing. Alright, so we're going to start by popping off the head and the disconnected linkage, and then we're just going to remove the cylinder, so then we'll have the top end off. Alright, so I think I might have pointed this out before, but I don't know if you guys can see. Right here on the linkage arm that connects the power valve, it was cracked and welded back together, so that's going to need replacement for sure. Something else I just noticed, you guys probably see it now. There's actually the nut for the cylinder is missing inside the cover, so that's always good practice, but I'm thinking this engine's going to need a whole new bolt and fastener kit, so I'm sure that'll be part of the order. Alright, so we got all the nuts off. Now we're just going to go ahead and pull the cylinder off. Boot looks as you would expect, I guess. Once I get a better cleaning done on all these parts, I'll be able to inspect for cracks or any dry rot. You know, this bike's 18 years old, so once you get to that age and when you start working on some older stuff, dry rot is a pretty big concern. And as for the actual reed cage, looks like we got some silicone going on here. If I can get this thing out here. I don't know if you guys can see, but normally the best way to tell how the reeds are is look inside. And if you can see light, your reeds are worn. But if it's complete darkness, that means they're still holding a good seal, and they should still have some wear left. These do look like an aftermarket set of reeds, so hopefully they're fairly fresh and should be fine. Alright, so now I'm going to move on to the ignition side of the engine. I'm going to take off the ignition cover and the counter sprocket there. Then I'll work my way in towards the flywheel and all that jazz. So I'm going to need to break out my impact driver to break these loose. I don't want to risk breaking one off or whatever. And actually, looking close now, it looks like this ignition cover might have a crack in it that somebody tried to glue up. But you never know what you're going to find. Tell you guys, these flywheel and clutch holding tools are a must-have. They save a lot of knuckles and prevent breaking a lot of things and a lot of swearing. Highly recommended. Well, this is the nut from the flywheel, and it's not really wanting to focus here, but it looks like the threads from this nut were left in on the flywheel. I'll see if I can get that for you guys. Yeah, it's pretty chewed up in there. So that's not a great sign, but whatever, we've got a fresh crank to go in this anyway. But it would be nice if this one was salvageable to have rebuilt for somebody. It's just the lower rod bearing that's gone, so who knows? We'll get a better idea on whether or not it's worth reusing for something else later on. So before I go ahead and put my flywheel puller in here, I'm just going to clean up the threads on the inside of the flywheel. That way it's a nice mating surface, an easy thread in through easy thread out. Don't want to damage my tool, and I also don't want to damage the flywheel. Alright, so I've got my flywheel puller tool threaded in here. This is a Motion Pro one. I've bought cheap ones in the past and had terrible experiences, just difficult to use, not smooth. I've used this one 5 or 6 times now on different engines, and it works perfect every time. I absolutely love it. So I actually don't have a thumb wrench here to hold this one with, so we're going to hope that the impact will do the trick. And that's all it was to it. And the reason why the flywheel puller came off as I was torquing it, these things are reverse thread, so they're designed to be held. So yeah, that's why it kind of just shot in there and then spun out. But nonetheless, it did the job, and we've got our flywheel off. So one other thing I noticed when I was taking off this flywheel is there was no washer in here. It was just the nut. Now, I know when I've done my 250 YZ and also the 250F, there was a washer in there. I think it's missing, but I don't have to double check the parts microfiche just to be sure. And the other thing that's fairly disappointing to see is these hardware store bolts jammed in here. So we've got some Home Depot stuff going on. Not too stoked on that. So these hardware store bolts are a 10 mil. I'm just going to zip those out. In the 2-stroke, it was actually, or in my 250 2-stroke, it was actually Phillips heads in here, so ended up having to use the impact screwdriver on those as well. And that's that. Oh, lovely. So guys, here's what I found lodged in around the crank seal. That is the Woodruff key to align the flywheel on the crankshaft. It's not something you really want to find floating around inside your ignition area, so hopefully it's not nothing's damaged around the cases. Looks like a bit of corrosion, but nothing really out of the ordinary. There's a hot rods crank in here and some black make-a gasket stuff. So I'm not sure if it's the actual Yamavan or 3M grade that the owner's manual calls for, but we're going to see what kind of history lies within this. Alright, so we're done on the ignition side. Now we're going to start in on the clutch side of the motor, or engine, I guess, correct terminology, but we're just going to remove the Kickstarter, and then we'll remove the clutch cover and water pump, and then the inner clutch cover, I call it, and then we'll keep on moving forward from there. So then we've got the kickstart off. We're going to remove the clutch cover. We're going to remove the 4 of the 6 clutch cover bolts that are supposed to be there. Alright, and here we are. Nothing too out of the ordinary there. Clutch pack and everything is there, so let's go a little further and see where we get. metal shavings in there, so we'll see what the culprit of that is. So now I'm just going to pull the water pump assembly and see what we've got in there. Alright, so now we got those two outer covers removed. We're going to go ahead and pull all the bolts for the inner clutch cover and expose to the right side of the case and see what we got going on there. So this thing is probably going to need some persuasion. Luckily, the rubber hammer, or not the rubber hammer, but sorry, a plastic hammer. Rubber kind of bounces and doesn't get enough force through the surface it's contacting, but the plastic is perfect. It gets just enough force, but it won't damage. So, must have. Just like that, she's free. Alright. Wow. So, our governor assembly, more or less identical to the one on the 250i. Same with the water pump. Looks, all that looks pretty good. Not much wear on those gears. Looks fairly healthy. We'll get in for a closer inspection when we go to tear things down individually, but another sign, look, you can see all this metallic oil with some debris in there, so something let go for sure. I'm really hoping it's not going to be anything too expensive if it's in the transmission like that, but who knows? We'll get in there and see. Alright, let's pull this clutch back. Alright, so we've got the clutch springs and bolts out, so now we're just going to pull off this and then the plates and discs. So I've got a couple of the clutch plates came with it, but this here, it's not really looking too bad actually. If you, no, nothing really to be concerned about with this portion of the clutch. We're just going to pull off the rest of these plates. There actually seems to be a bit of wear left on some of these, but sorry, I was holding it away from the camera, but we'll measure that with the caliper later on and see what kind of wear is left. Probably going to have to replace that. You know, for the price, it's, if you're putting together a whole new motor or engine, it's just about to replace these. Alright guys, this is exactly why you should never reuse these clips or like circlips, washers, these folding washers that secure nuts and stuff like that. In the manual, if it says replace it, just replace it. Like, these are a few cents to $1. This person who previously built this engine, you know, reused this, and you know, it was cracked before I opened it up. But I wanted to just show you guys, like, this fracture is almost the whole way across the folding tab of that washer, and if that were to let go and come loose, it'd be a pretty bad time. It's just one of those preventative things that you can do to save yourself a lot of trouble. Alright guys, so we're going to zip this nut off with the impact here. I know this isn't an impact socket, but the largest one I have is a 1 1/16, so it's going to have to do for now. Alright guys, that was by far the hardest clutch hub nut I've ever had to take off. It took a lot of heat. I tried the impact gun, cranked up the PSI on the air compressor, still wouldn't come off, so I had to basically heat it up and use the holding tool and got it with a massive breaker bar and some pipe on the end. Whoever torqued that thing down sure cranked on it. There it is. So that's the inner hub, the washer that sits behind it. Don't forget that washer. It's going to be there. Don't forget to look for it. And then just the outer hub with the double roller bearing inside, along with the sleeve. So you can see sleeve and double roller bearing all in there. I like to keep this together as a unit. Prevents you from losing things. That is hot. Alright, so next we're going to remove the Kickstarter assembly. And that just slides it like so. Alright, now I'm just going to remove this circlip holding on the kickstart idler gear. There is a washer that sits on the back of this kickstart idler gear, so don't forget to keep an eye out for that. And also looks like there's a second circlip on this shaft. Just noticing that now. It wasn't there on the 250, so that's something you're going to want to remove as well. It'll prevent you from splitting the cases later on. Just pull that off. Alright guys, so I've temporarily reinstalled the outer portion of the clutch basket, and the reason being is I've got to remove this primary drive gear here. So they do make a holding tool to wedge this together or hold the piston. I've seen a couple different style ones, but a trick that's never letting me down is a good old-fashioned discontinued Canadian penny. You wedge that between the gears. It's nice and soft, so it's very malleable, and it won't damage your drive gears. Oh, better watch the tripod. So I'll just put that in there like so. Grab my breaker bar. Some good leverage on this. And there she goes. Wow, just look at all the thread locker in there. Surprised this thing broke free as easy as it did. Sorry for knocking the piston against the sides of the cases, or I should probably be a little bit more careful about that, but it's going to get cleaned up anyway. That piston certainly won't be getting reused. Wow, this is just glued in there with Loctite. So, there you guys have it. That is how not to put Loctite on. It's all gooped out around the ends, and look at how much is on the inner threads of this bolt. If I can just get it to focus here. Hope you guys can see that. Oh, it's starting to fall off, but that is the thread locker that the guy had on the bolt. Alright guys, so now that that's it, we're down to basically just the shifting mechanism. So I'm just going to pull out the shift shaft. Easy enough. Well, it was. Pop it in through here. Looks like it wants to come out. There it is. So now we're cooking with gas. There she is. Let's just give this a wipe down. So I'm seeing a nice bit of wear on this. It's pretty chewed up actually. So this might be a replacement item. I've been through this in the past and it's just so frustrating to get something back together and realize your shift shaft isn't straight. Now we're just going to pop off the retainer for the pull mechanism. Be mindful of this little washer right here. This comes off. Just don't lose it. Try to keep this together as an assembly so you know how it goes back together. Always refer to your service manual. That's all is to it. There she is. There's a bit of tension on that boy actually. Maybe that's something I should have removed after the mechanism, but whatever, it's done. That's the segment. Alright guys, we're at that pivotal point of the teardown of the engine where we get to split the cases. This is the exciting part. Just make sure you have the right tools and it'll be a whole lot easier. I went ahead and broke all the little Allen bolts loose first because they stress me out. They tend to strip pretty easy. But, you know, nothing we couldn't figure out. Didn't take very long. I'm going to point one thing out to you guys that concerns me right off this bat with this engine is this is the first 125 engine I've done, but I did do a few more previously, right? So in the 250 two-stroke YZ, I know that this crank seal is supposed to be flush with the outer portion of the case. This one is inset like significantly, so I'm wondering if maybe that might attribute to the failure of the lower connecting rod bearing. So that's a lot of strain on something that's supposed to be rotating like 10, 11,000 RPM sometimes, right? So we'll, you know, something to take note of. Alright guys, so I got the splitter installed there. Just mounted it flush to the case, threaded in the studs, or the bar stock, and yeah, I took a bit of heat to the crease of the cases where the old gasket would be, just to loosen that up a little bit or warm it up, goo it up. Now we're good to start cranking on this thing and open it up. This is a weird orientation. And there's the pot we're looking for. So it's split on the back, not quite yet on the front here. So you want to make sure it's splitting evenly so you don't distort anything. So we're just going to give that a little tap with the hammer there and see what's going on. Just like that, we're home free. And that's the case half. Alright guys, so here we are where we left off yesterday. My camera battery died last night, so here we are this morning. Just want to show you guys basically where we are. So previously I mentioned that this seal was inset too far. So just a closer look at that, you guys can see how far in that's in. Like, that's a mistake you don't want to make. That's way too far. That seal is supposed to be just flush with the outer surface of this case. So I'll show you the consequences of installing it that way. So as you can see here, the seal is sticking right up into where the bearing was supposed to sit. So that's been pressed against the bearing for all those hours, causing friction and God knows what else, right? So you can see how it's worn, and it actually left a wear mark in the seating area for where the bearing's supposed to be. So looks like it might have actually left some scarring on the case, which is never what you want. Other than that, things seem pretty typical. You know, it was rebuilt, so the last person used an excessive amount of silicone, so that's gonna be fun to pick all that out. Our main bearing stayed with the crank, as it does sometimes. It's super rough. All of our transmission is there and seems to be good, so we'll start pulling the other things out of here. We'll get the crank out and get the transmission out, and then we'll be good to basically start the cleaning process. Alright, so I'm just going to start by removing the shift forks. Now, in the 125, the shafts, or the shafts that the shift forks slide on, aren't fixed to the fork like in the 250 YZ, so that's going to save a little frustration now and when it comes time to reassemble it. And there's our shift drum. Very similar to the one on the 250 actually, almost. Same principle basically. All these two-stroke engines are built identically. Just grab our shift forks. So that's the counter shaft. And the primary shaft. So again, this is a good time to check for washers. Most likely going to be replacing all these transmission bearings, so this one here feels pretty rough actually. And there are a lot of metal shavings down in this corner.
and that's actually the corner where the shift shaft comes through. And if you guys remember from removing that, that was difficult to get out, which leads me to believe it might have been bent and why it could have been binding there and left all those metal shavings. So that's probably something we're gonna have to replace. It's not a good sign. All right, guys. So we've got the splitter mounted up to the right side of the case, and we're just gonna push out the crankshaft. Wow, that probably could have been pushed out by hand.
Alright guys, that's going to do it for this video. Thank you for watching. This has been super fun. Probably, well, not the most exciting part of a build, but it's definitely fun. It's one of the parts I look forward to the most, is getting at these engines. So thank you for joining me with that. Don't forget to subscribe, get the notifications, the little bell there, and follow me on Instagram at SelectMX. Try to stay updated with the build and see the excitement. Thanks again.